session.
All right, fine.
Yeah. So the first session is about demystifying adaptive thresholding in ITSI, and we have our star sales engineer, Mike Geldert. And I would like to hand over the the screen share to Mike so he can continue from now on. Over to you, Mike.
Excellent. Thank you, Saurabh. So I'm Mike Geldart, and I am patiently waiting for Saurabh to stop sharing his screen so I can share mine. There we go. And so a brief history about me. I've been in the IT industry for way too many years to tell you about. But I've been a tech working on mainframes all the way up through an IT director for a global pharmaceutical company in IT operations. So I've been with Splunk for roughly almost 5 years now. And I specialize in the ITOA area in Splunk as a consulting sales engineer for all of EMEA. For all of emerging markets. Okay, so can you tell me, can you see my screen?
You would want to swap displays, Mike.
Swap
you can see up. Yeah.
All right, that's what I figured. It always happens that way, which means I'm going to turn off my camera because now I have to look up all the time and it's just not going to look good. So I will turn off my camera and everybody's favorite Splunk slide. You all know it well, so I'm not really going to review it. I may make one or two forward-looking statements, but I doubt it. So let's talk about adaptive thresholding. So just so everybody knows, I mean, I know there's quite a few people here. Some of you may not be familiar with ITSI at all, or what it does, or what it's trying to do. So very, very brief history of ITSI, and I don't have a slide for this. We're just going to talk through it. So Splunk started as an IT operations log gathering and searching tool, way back in the early 2000s. And, as we provided this service, we continually iterated on what we could find, and mostly driven by customers and what their goals were and what they were doing with the product. And it really opened our eyes to the power on the IT side. So a few years ago, we developed an application called ITSI. It's called IT Service Intelligence. And basically what it does is it takes multitude of metrics from different sources, allows you to roll them up into KPIs, put them together as services, on those KPIs as services, and then link services together based on their dependencies in an overall large service to be delivered to an end user. And that's what ITSI does. And based on those dependencies and those KPIs, it gets you into the ability to do smart alerting and massively reduce the amount of noise you're getting from your monitoring systems. That's the basics of it. I'm not going to go into any more detail because we're limited on time. But one of the key elements of ITSI is our implementation of some machine learning algorithms to help you understand how your data or how your metrics and systems are operating over time, and then adjust your thresholds dynamically so that they better reflect how your systems operate, and so they're not sending you false positives all the time. And then we do have some other ML as well for predictive analytics. We're not going to talk about that today. Today, we're just going to look at adaptive thresholding. So let's move on it. So let's go through it. Here's the agenda. So we're going to talk about what happens when you create a KPI. Now, by the way, this is very technical. And I know you guys are all Splunk users, so hopefully you'll be able to follow along. If not, please put the questions in and I'll clarify anything you need. Shai, if questions come up, please, you can interrupt me from the chat and I'll answer them. So one of the keys to this is going to be some hidden thresholding dashboards that you probably don't know about, but which are very important to tuning thresholds. We'll look at time policies, which are critical to adaptive thresholdings. We're going to look at how exactly does adaptive thresholding work, right? Finally, demystified. By the way, this is not my deck. I'm not this smart. I've stolen it pretty much word for word from Jeff Wiedemann, one of our really core ITSI people. So yeah, just so you know. A simple and effective step-by-step process. So we're actually going to tell you what to do. I know most of the times we're like, well, it depends. It's Splunk. You can do it this way. You can do it that way. No, we're going to tell you exactly what to do this time when you're doing adaptive thresholdings with a simple and effective step-by-step process. So let's get on to it. And by the way, at the end, the let's do it, I have a video from Jeff where he steps through how to do it. And it's very enlightening. By the way, there's also going to be 3 video links on this presentation with QR codes. So keep your phones handy. I'll pause for enough time for you to get the QR codes so you can get the link for those videos, okay? So what happens when you save a KPI? Well, basically, you create a KPI by creating either a search, a base search, or using a metrics index and giving it a number of parameters, a time span and a frequency. So a time span that the search goes back and gathers the metrics, and then a frequency that the metric is gathered. Time spans typically 5, or 15 minutes. 5, 15, or 24 hours. Anyway, that's not where the important part. The important part is the frequency, 1, 5, or 15 minutes. And that's the frequency at which the KPI search runs. And when you create this KPI, it creates a unique KPI ID and it saves that to the KV store, right? So that's what happens when you create it. And then it creates a saved search, and that saved search runs on a regular basis. Now, what I want to show you here is anybody who knows ITSI, if you want to find out the KPI ID that's generated when you create a KPI, you open up the KPI search, you look at the generated search, and here in the generated search, you will find a KPI ID equals, and that is the unique ID for your KPI. So you can use this unique ID to search the ITSI summary index and to search the KV store to find information about this KPI if you want to look at it that way. And you'll see where that becomes useful further on. So just a quick information about how to find that unique ID that's created. So next, here's what happens. The saved search is created. It gets, as you can see, and it's not the same search. That last search was from my system, but you can see here the unique ID is generated, and it's embedded inside the name of the search. That is, it's scheduled, and then you can see the next scheduled time, right? And you can see there's a number of searches scheduled here. Now, if it's a base search, it's a little bit different. It has a base search unique identifier instead of a KPI ID unique identifier, but basically either way, you get a unique identifier generated. And it runs every 1, every 5, or every 15 minutes, depending what you've chosen when you created the KPI. So here's what we can look at inside the ITSI summary index, and we can see what's being created. So when it runs that search, what happens is it computes a number of things in that search, right? So what you'll notice is if you do this search inside the ITSI summary index, you'll find actually more than one record for every run, okay? You're gonna find 2 or 3 or 5, or you can find many records because it actually has an entry for the service health score, which it calculates, the aggregate KPI, which it calculates, and then it also, if you've turned on per entity, there'll be an entry for each entity's own KPI as well, right? Because per entity means, and we're not going to go into deep into entity filters, but basically you can create a KPI in a service. That service has a number of entities associated with it. and you filter what entities you want into the KPI, and then you can do a per entity threshold, meaning that you can monitor each of those resources individually. So if you do a per entity, then you're going to see an entry for each of those entities in the summary index. So that's what goes into the summary index, the number of entries and why they're there. And then the next thing we need to know is what actually gets written to the summary index. So like I said, we've got the service health scores, the aggregate KPI results, and the per entity KPI results. So what fields are important? So we've already talked about this, the source, right? It's always important. One thing you'll notice here is KPI ID does not have an underscore in the ITSI summary index. So keep that in mind. The underscore is actually in the KV store, but in the summary index, there's no underscore in the KPI ID. So if you're searching for that field, just keep that in mind. But that's your unique identifier. And then the two most important things that are done are they calculate the alert value, which is basically the results of the search and the aggregate that you've asked it to do. So you may have asked it to do a count, or you may have asked it to do an average, or you may have asked it to do a max of whatever that search is in the calculation value. That's basically equivalent to what your stats would be if you were doing it yourself in the stats in a search. And then the output of that actually determines your alert level, and your alert level is the severity from 1 to 6 based on the thresholds that are set. So if the value is over that critical threshold, then the alert level would be a 6. If it was informational and you'd set it to informational, so it doesn't actually have a critical, any type of threshold, it's just an informational KPI that you put in, that would be a 1. And then low, medium, high are in between them, right? So that's the alert level. So the next thing we want to talk about is backfill. So this is where we start looking at that data that's being generated and written to the ITSI summary index, and how we take that information, look historically, and apply that to an adaptive threshold. So the adaptive threshold has an amount of data to run through its algorithm, right? So as it says here, adaptive threshold is heavily dependent on the ITSI summary data. Backfilling goes hand in hand with adaptive thresholding, okay? So when you create a KPI, and then you go into thresholding and you turn on adaptive thresholding, the next steps is what happened. So as soon as you hit save, it kicks off a special backfill search, a separate search, and it basically goes through the ITSI summary index like it was just calculating KPIs only for the last 7 days, right? It's doing exactly the same functions, and then it's rolling that up and it's writing those results to the ITSI summary index almost the same way it writes a normal KPI. So this is important. You only get one shot at the backfill of KPI. So basically, if you create the KPI and then a few days later you go back and you say, well, I really want a different type of roll up. So I chose average, but I think 99th percentile is better, or I think the mean is better, or whatever the case may be, to give you the information you need from that KPI. Your backfill that you've done in that KPI will not change. Even if you go in and save it again, it will not change. So because it runs it once based on that unique KPI ID. So what you would do is you'd clone that KPI, right? You can give it a different name, then you can delete the old KPI or rename the new KPI. Now it has a new, its own unique KPI ID, and then you go ahead and run the backfill, and you'll get the new backfill based on how you've changed that search. So, yeah, stats. I think certainly anybody that I've talked to about ITSI, and anybody who knows about ITSI or talked to people, never use stats when you're creating a KPI search. Now, these days, we pretty much all just want metrics from the metrics index. And that's the easiest way to create a metric in ITSI and a KPI. But if you are making base searches, or you are doing just ad hoc searches for KPIs, never use the stats command. The stats are being done by ITSI when you choose how you're going to do your roll-ups and your scheduling and what you want to look at. By doing it in the search, you've basically taken away all that historical information from ITSI to calculate its KPI on, right? The values. So if you absolutely 100% have to do it, have some statistics created for a KPI, then use event stats or stream stats that maintain the timestamps in the KPI. So at least, you know, that ITSI can then start working on them on its time basis like it does. Okay. So here's where we get to the really important stuff. A lot of that is just review for some people who've used ITSI, but there are some thresholding dashboards that are available. Now, one of the things about some, and we're going to discuss this in depth, is most of the things that you see in the standard ITSI threshold or interface, even when it's looking at the actual data and the thresholds, you're getting some kind of roll up, like a 30-minute thing. If you want to see full fidelity, these dashboards give you full fidelity. So you can see your outliers on a KPI gathered by KPI point, right? So every KPI you get to see in this dashboard, and you can get the most granular look at it, so you can identify the outliers that may have gotten swallowed up inside of those roll-ups that are happening in the main interface. So these actually exist in the content pack for monitoring and alerting. Okay, so the content pack for monitoring and alerting is actually very, very important for ITSI. It actually will help walk you through, once you've done your service tree, once you've got all your KPIs done, you can, the dashboards to tune those KPIs come in this, but this content pack also helps you go from those services and KPIs to tuning them for notable events, to tuning aggregation policies and grouping those notable events together, and then to take meaningful action against them. So the content pack is very cool. It really gives you a step-by-step to understand how to do these aggregations. Sometimes, you know, if you know ITSI, you'll go into the aggregation policies and the episode policies, and you know, sometimes it can be a little bit fuzzy, and there's a lot of information there. The content pack here will help step you through that process. And if you're using ITSI, I highly recommend that you download it and start using it. Okay, so there's also quite a number of tech talks and conf presentations about the content pack. So you can just search for that, and it's out there, and you can review some of that stuff to give you an idea of how to use it well. So what we're going to talk about today, these are the dashboards that are actually created in ITSI when you install the content pack. So now you'll see here that there's duplicates of these. The content pack has been around for a while, so it was a separate content pack, and then it was added to the content pack library. So if you've got both installed, you'll see duplicates, but they're identical. Doesn't matter which one you use, they're all the same. So today we're going to be talking about the ITSI service KPI threshold analytics. You can also, there's also one for severity analytics, and there's information about that as well that helps you tune the severity of your KPIs and your services. Today we're just going to talk about tuning those thresholds because we're talking about adaptive thresholds. So this is the first QR code. This is a tech talk that goes very deep into tuning the ITSI KPI thresholds. So I'll wait here like 10 seconds. So everybody who wants to can grab their phones and get this link to the Tech Talk. Okay, 10 seconds of deafening silence. All right, so let's move on, and we'll start talking about the guts of this. So here's one of the most important things, and one of the concepts that I think can be a little bit difficult. It's the threshold time policies. Now, it's very difficult to have adaptive thresholding without using time policies of some type, okay? You may be able to use just a default time policy, but for the most part, you want to have multiple time policies for a KPI because systems act differently at different times. And of course, the easiest understanding of that is, business systems. And, in traditional days, before the last couple of years, it was Monday to Friday, 8 to 6. Where your busy times and you'd want different monitoring in those times based on what's happening on the weekend. And those would be two separate time policies. So once you define a time policy, each time policy can have an independent threshold. And that's very important. And that's why we use time policies, because, when you're talking about 8 to 9 a.m. in the morning, when all the users come into the office, and I'm using air quotes, and log in, you may have a massive spike in logins, right? The rest of the day, it may average out to, 20 logins a minute, but in the morning it's 300, right? So those are different thresholds that you need to have programmed in, and you need different time policies for those. And that's why the time policies get independent thresholds, right? So let's take a look at an example KPI. So this is a a load or utilization KPI, and basically it's showing you on a daily basis from Monday to Sunday, starting from left to right, from left to right, and they've given you the metrics and the KPIs for each of these days, and you can see here that you've got a pretty standard utilization period during the work week. You can see here on Friday it drops off, so lots of folks slack off a little bit on Fridays, or maybe take the day off. But whatever the case may be, you see here you've got your week period, and then you've got your weekend period, and they're markedly different as far as the KPI goes for this load. So you can see here that we've got Monday, and that you can see that, and then you've got Tuesday, and it's got its own set of KPIs. And then what you want to do from that is you want to see, okay, what's common? What time periods are kind of common here? And we've decided that 8 to 10 a.m. time frame seems to be pretty common across our KPI the entire week. So in this case, what we do is we'd make a time policy called weekdays, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Okay, and that would be our first time policy for this particular KPI. And then we'd say, okay, well, obviously it's pretty easy to see that we have another period of time as a completely different set of values for this KPI, and that's the weekend. So the weekend would be your, what we call your second time policy, right? Your weekend time policy. And then thirdly, you see that we've got the two together. So now we've got the weekend time policy, the weekdays 8 to 10 a.m. time policy. Those are what we are considering the two unique time periods. Now, honestly, this is just an example. If it was me personally, I'd probably have this afternoon spike as a time policy too, but they didn't do that in this example. So what they've done in this example is say, okay, we've got two time policies for specific time frames, and then we have a default time policy or default that covers the rest of the time, right? So we've got default policy that covers the all times except for the Wednesday 8 to 10 a.m. policy, or the weekdays 8 to 10 a.m. policy, and the weekend policy. Okay, so in this case, for this KPI, whoever's building out the service and creating the KPI have decided that these are the 3 time policies that they want to go forward with. Okay, so how does adaptive thresholding work? Let's dig into it. It's actually not that complicated, which is good. I'm not good with complicated. So key ingredients, training window, how far back to look at the ITSI summary index when computing thresholds. 1 or more time policies. You have to have a time policy for adaptive threshold. Even if it's just a single default policy, you have to have it. Algorithms, you have to choose the correct algorithm for your KPI. And we'll get into that a little bit deeper later. Algorithm threshold parameters, okay? Determine what should be considered critical, high, and normal, okay? So, as I said at the top, we're actually going to walk you through what the recommended configurations are. Now, these are a recommended starting point. For the majority of KPIs, this will actually be sufficient and work very well. You still have to review this with the analytics dashboard that I showed you and modify as necessary, right? So first, okay. So Jeff is very, very clear that he's not a fan of the pre-built thresholding templates. And the reason is that for the majority of KPIs and businesses, there isn't really a good common default template to use. So we recommend do not use those thresholding templates. They're a mix of different time periods and different algorithms, and rarely do they ever work for a KPI that you're trying to work with. So set a custom threshold, okay? Custom built thresholds are good. We're going to walk you through how to build how you're doing that, the same as we did in the last graphics, the different time policies, and then the adaptive threshold, okay? If you have KPIs that are common across a number of different services or a number of different areas, then custom thresholds are good, or threshold templates are good, because you can apply them to the common KPIs in different services. So again, don't use the pre-built thresholds. He's really adamant about it. Training window, last 7 days. Very rare that you need to go past the last 7 days. That's the default, leave it there. It usually generates the best results. Time policies. You can have as many as necessary, but as few as possible, okay? So it's the same thing when you're building ITSI services. As few KPIs as possible in your service to give you the information you need about the health of those entities in that service. So same thing with time policies. Narrow it down as few that will give you the proper behavior that you're looking for. Algorithms, okay. Standard deviation only. So over the years, we have found that the quantile and the other, which I can't remember off the top of my head, do not give the expected results that you might hope for. So our recommendation is that if you're going to use one of the machine learning algorithms, use standard deviation. You can also use static, right? You can still build out all these time policies using static thresholds and adaptive thresholds. If you're using machine learning algorithms, just standard deviation. And if you're using static, that's fine. You put you know the numbers that you want, and you put them in the proper areas. Okay, so this is an important piece right here. Okay, so these are what we would consider a standard setting for standard deviation, right? So, and this is where adaptive thresholding gets a little, because it's not particularly well explained. What you're doing here is you're setting the algorithm as standard deviation. You're not saying here that the number 3 is your threshold. What you're saying here is that you want as critical if the KPI value is 3 or more derivations from the mean, right? So basically it is it's the mean times 3 standard deviations from the mean. That would be considered a critical KPI. A high KPI would be 2.5 from the mean, 2.5 standard deviations from the mean, and then medium would be 2, and then base would be normal. We have found these to be optimal for standard KPIs where high is bad and lower is good. Okay. Now, if you've got KPIs where low is bad and high is good, you have to tune this a little bit. This particular one is where low is good and high is bad. And these were the values that we recommend. But again, you put these values in, you check the thresholding dashboards to make sure you're not getting too many outliers or it's not encapsulating enough of the standard variation in your KPI. Next, how the thresholds are computed. Well, they're basically each time policy computes its own mean for each of the time periods, right? So this time policy, independent thresholds, in the ITSI summary index, you've got the calculation of the mean for these different time periods, and that's what your threshold is compared against. Same thing with the default policy. It takes the rest of it, and then same thing with the weekends. Each of them get their own calculations of the mean and calculations of standard deviation from that mean. Okay. So how they're computed, right? So the training window, ITSI runs that search I talked about, looks at the aggregate values over the last 7 days for the different time periods. Same thing, still looking at the time periods when you're doing the backfill. Okay. Next thing is the time policies, right? So we talked about that. They're grouping the training data together per each time policy, like I said. Next is the algorithm. And again, for each time policy, whether it be standard deviation or static, it's computing the mean and standard deviation from that mean based on the training data for the policy. And then finally, algorithm threshold parameters for each time policy, compute the final threshold values based on the threshold parameters in the mean and standard deviation. So I put this in red just to give you an idea. So the mean, right, is whatever it is, whether it be maybe if you're measuring CPU, the mean is 30%, right? The standard deviation is potentially 6 from the mean. So your critical is 3 times 6 plus the mean, and that gives you, 3 times 3, 18, and then you get that, it's 48. 48 is not too high for a CPU. So, but you get what I'm talking about. So you take the mean, you do those standard deviations, you multiply it by whatever you set that threshold to be. In this case, it was 3 for critical. You add them together, and that's how it determines your actual threshold number. Okay. Again, happy to take questions if there's any questions on this. But this is basically how it's done. So this is what it starts to look like when you do a policy like that. You can see here that what we've got is this policy, right? For the 8 to 10 a.m., it always stays green, right? If it stays within its parameters, you can see it's got a little green notch out here. The default policy, you can see, well, we didn't account for the end of day spike like we did for the beginning of day spike. So every day you're going to get this KPI going into yellow and even some into high. So into low and then into high. And that's going to happen every day because the time policy says that's what it should be. And then finally, for the weekends, you can see here, it's set critical to very low. If it spikes up at all on the weekend, it's going to generate a worse health score, right? The alert value will go down and thus the service will start to degrade. Yeah. And that's basically adaptive thresholding in a nutshell and how it works. So step-by-step approach, right? The first thing you do before you build a KPI, or just after you build the KPI maybe, is that you sit down with that dashboard and with the ITS, with the service owner, and discuss the patterns, right? You look at that KPI and you see what the pattern is. Now, look, if it's ISA type stuff, if it's CPU on servers, if it's memory, all that stuff, those are pretty well known. You don't need to go through this process. But ITSI really focuses more on the high value KPIs, business process KPIs, response time KPIs. And those are the kind of KPIs that you want to discuss with the service owner to make sure that they're comfortable with the pattern and with, you know, where this KPI will start to alarm or start to degrade the service as its values go higher or lower depending on its threshold. And then, of course, you determine the appropriate time policies based on that discussion. You configure all the time policies with the recommendations, right? And then you review the KPI threshold again in the dashboard. And now I'm going to show you a video that Jeff did that walks you through exactly how to do that and what to look at. So here we go with the video. And we will see. Okay. Can you see the video?
Not yet.
No? All right, so let me swap it to a different display. How about now?
No.
No?
No.
Okay, then I'll stop sharing and reshare just the video. Okay, how about that?
Yep. Yes.
Okay. All right, here we go. A few seconds of silence, so don't worry too much.
Here is you are looking at that ITSI service and KPI threshold analytics dashboard. That's part of the content pack for monitoring and alerting. So let's roll the video and talk about what's happening. At the top of the screen, select the KPI that we want.
There's no audio, Mike.
It was there at the beginning. Now it's not there. Yeah.
Mike, we can't hear it. Mike, can you hear us? Guys, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, I can
Okay.
hear you.
Yeah,
I can hear you.
Result of the ITSI summary index can be seen on this dashboard. Okay, so we look at this response time KPI, and it is
Okay, folks, I apologize. I didn't realize you couldn't hear the video on this. So let me see.
Mike, so sorry to cut you off. So I'm just cognizant of time as well because we have another interesting session from Ahmed. So maybe if this is available as part of conf or is this publicly available, you know, you can probably share the link, and we can share it with the team as well. Otherwise, probably we can share it one-to-one with the team as well.
All right.
Yep.
Yep, that's fine. Actually, it's one of the QR codes that
Okay, cool.
that we're going to have. So let me share up the presentation again, and I'll show you the QR codes. Okay, do I need to swap again or not?
No.
Okay. All right, so right here, this is actually, so there's two more videos. There's this one for cyclical KPIs, and then the next one is actually the video that we were about to watch. And cognizant of time, you can watch that at your leisure and see exactly how the process works, okay? So I'll give you 5 more seconds to grab the link for this. Okay, hopefully everybody's gotten a chance to get that QR code. And we'll go to the next one. And this is the video we were about to watch for the more uniform KPI. Okay, so another 10 seconds for this, and then we'll get Ahmed going for his very interesting presentation. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Okay, there we go. Thanks, everybody. I hope you found it useful. And Ahmed, away you go.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Mike. And there were a few questions. That was really good, by the way. There were a few questions that I tried to answer in the chat, guys. If I hope that kind of clarified. If it didn't, maybe you can pick Mike's brain for the next 3 minutes before Ahmed starts. And if anybody has any comments, feedbacks on this, that will be great as well.
It was a great session, Mike. Thank you. So just one question now. For adaptive thresholding to configure, content packs are not necessary, right? You can configure it for any KPIs which we put it in.
Sure, the content pack is only for those thresholding dashboards that allow you to see the granular KPIs. So when those dashboards populate, the search brings back every single KPI. However, when you look at the rollup, when you look at the actual KPI configuration screen, and it shows you that small screen, the small window with the actual KPI information, those are 30-minute rollups. So you can actually miss some outliers if you just rely on that. So the content packs are free. It's just highly recommended that you download them and install them. And there is a lot more benefit to that content pack as well. But to answer your question is yes, absolutely. You can configure without the content pack.
Thank you, Mike.
Welcome.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. Ahmed, take it away, man.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ahmed Al Sheikh, sales engineer in the Dubai team, looking after the Middle East. My pleasure to meet you all today, and I'll be running this presentation about what's new in our new releases that has been announced in our last conf. I won't take much time. We'll just move through these slides. Please, if you have any questions, just drop it on the chat. So first of all, we have our updates on the platform, Splunk core itself. And the first one is really interesting, which is the data manager. So data manager is a new way and simple, automated for cloud data onboarding in specific. So now instead of installing these add-ons and apps for each cloud provider, now you can enable it through your data input and start collecting data into your Splunk environment. For sure, this data is useful for different use cases and for specific apps that has been already there. The second one, which is really interesting as well, which is the ingest actions, which is basically so it's basically like the GUI interface, like a graphical interface for what you used to do in the transforms.conf. So before indexing, when you need to reroute the data and mask the data or filter out some information. Now you can do it through a nice clean GUI interface, just like the field extractor that you have on Splunk. Now we have it as ingest actions. So it's really interesting and will make life easier for people, especially who are into running it manually or running these config files previously and testing it out. So this one is really will make life much more easier. All right, so federated search, of course, you have heard about it before. So now it's out, and federated search basically is for running searches across different Splunk environments, either on-prem, on cloud. So now you can, if you have like a Splunk cloud instance and a Splunk on-prem, now it's federated search supports the search across these different environments. It's really important because some of our customers are now moving to the cloud, but still some departments need their environment to be on premises. So in order to have one unified search platform or one unified interface for searching across both environments, federated search is the answer. So it's really interesting update and enables the journey to the cloud migration to many organizations nowadays. And now my favorite, which is the Splunk Mobile and Dashboard Studio. So now the update for the Dashboard Studio is out there. It's really nice, intuitive, drag and drop. It's much more better than the one we used to have before. And now you can access these ones, the cool dashboards on the mobile, of course, Splunk Mobile, in addition to using the augmented reality. So I'm not sure if everyone here have seen the augmented reality videos before, but it's really cool feature, which comes for free, of course, where you just need to scan with your mobile camera a QR code or a barcode, and you start getting these KPIs that Mike was talking about in the last session, or maybe some cool panels that you can see it right immediately on your mobile phone, or you can even take actions immediately, like open ticket. For example, in this screen, you can see someone is ordering parts for his BMW M4. So you can start taking action. Sorry?
So I want to cry.
Suddenly yes, is this a question?
No, sorry, I think it was unmuted by mistake.
All right, it's fine. All right, so this AR feature is really nice. It helps in the field a lot in some of our customers, where you can start scanning. For example, you can start scanning these QR codes in the rack in your data center, so you don't need to open this rack and maybe mistakenly unplug any network cable or any power cable, which might cause a disaster, of course. So it gives you a quick insights, and definitely for field engineers, for telco or for oil and gas, or some like for let's say electricity companies, where they need to run like scans for the smart meters or whatsoever, anything that is related to a field engineer. This is really handy and very useful. The last one is the virtual reality. So basically, it's a cool feature where some security admins might be using it, of course, because if they work remotely and they want to start like investigating and looking at different dashboards at the same time, the VR is really cool one, where you can use your VR gadget, of course, and start browsing through all these dashboards as if you are in a big SOC in your organization. So it's really cool stuff that enables you to visualize the information and to maneuver or go through all this information at a one time. Okay, Splunk Operator for Kubernetes. Maybe some of you have already tested it out, like a few months back. Now there is an update where it became better. It was enhanced and updated. Now you can deploy Splunk environment in containers running or orchestrated by Kubernetes, of course. So if nobody knows about it, it's basically if you want to run Splunk in containers or in a Kubernetes environment, Splunk operator is the way where you just run like a command or two to start deploying Splunk after just configuring a YAML file or config file, putting some parameters, and you will have Splunk up and running. So basically, you can run a single instance in just 10 seconds. So if you want to run Splunk, it will just run in 10 seconds because it's, of course, it's a container. And you can scale out a full cluster using 2 commands, which is really handy and really cool one. Of course, you can deploy distributed cloud, and now it supports enterprise security. So previously it wasn't, but now you can run enterprise security on top of the Splunk running in containers. Splunk base. It's more like a modern interface right now, and it's easy to find the apps, more consolidated. Now we have the Phantom apps as well on the same Splunk base. So it's, if you look at the Splunk base now, it will be like more than 3,000, I guess, apps, and it became more user friendly, I would say. Yeah. Now moving to security, we have interesting news about. So we have our new product, which is Splunk Intelligence Management. Splunk Intelligence Management is actually the rebranding of TrueStar, which we acquired. It's a Splunk operation intelligence, where threat intelligence, where we are integrating it into our security products. Of course, it works perfectly with Splunk Enterprise and ES, where we enrich and prioritize the event notables that comes in the ES. And of course, for the Splunk SOAR, which we previously called Splunk Phantom, we have intelligence-driven playbooks where we utilize the threat intel that we have in TrueStar already and enable it to have more intelligence-driven playbooks. One of the key area of Splunk Intelligence is we have something which is called enclaves, and enclaves are cloud-based cyber intelligence repositories that are at the core of Splunk Intelligence Management. So basically, when you use the enclaves, you usually use it for operationalize the enrichment from third-party sources, as well as your own internal and historical events, to share it across your SIM and SOAR. And of course, you can share it with different enterprises. For example, you can share, it's been shared already with the ISACs and ISAOs. So it's really important announcement, and it's really nice and completes our portfolio somehow, because many of our customers were asking about if we have our own threat intel. Now we have our own, and of course we can still use third party that if you already procured one, so it's still, the integration is still there. A new one is the risk-based alerting. I'm sure that you already have heard about it, but the way that risk-based alerting is a new way to align the alerts to business risk. So high-risk users or systems connects all these alerts together to show the pattern of an attack over time. So the use of this, or the importance of monitoring, or the security monitoring based on the risk base itself, is really significant in number of alerts, where it reduces this big time. But not only the number of alerts, it's more a higher quality of alerts, where you can focus more and take action much more faster than before, and reduce, of course, the false positive up to 30%. So it's a new way or a methodology where how to improve the detection accuracy and to focus your investigations. Splunk SOAR. So now we have our Splunk SOAR, which is again formerly called Phantom. Now we have it on cloud. So customers who are looking for running SOAR on cloud, you have the option of running it on-prem or on cloud. Of course, running on cloud it comes with the benefit of keeping all the updates and running all the updates automatically, and instead of doing it yourself or planning for downtime for the Splunk SOAR. And all the new updates will be running on the Splunk SOAR, of course, but again, Splunk on-prem is still an option, and customers can still use the on-prem version, and it's still supported by Splunk. One important update is the visuals or the visual playbook editor. I see it as an important one, honestly. So whenever you start editing or creating a workflow, it became really much more easier and much more intuitive, user-friendly, I would say, because of the conditions, of course. So when you start to put in too many conditions in a playbook, so you can really understand it once you do it, but 1 week later it will be a mess. So you need a new way or a better way to understand these playbooks. So you can scale the automation much more faster, and you can build it much more accurate and much more better than before. So I see it really important, and investing in the, you can see as the GUI much more user-friendly is on top of our updates this time. So moving to observability. So now our Splunk APM, which is formerly called SignalFX, we have the always-on profiling. So always-on profiling is basically the code level performance. So previously we didn't cover this part in the previous version. Now the users can have continuous profiling for the code performance to better understand or better troubleshoot, find the bottlenecks, analyze all the performances or efficiency of the code. It's important to correlate it, of course, with the other samples that we no sampling, I mean traces that we capture. It's important. It has been asked a lot by all of our customers, so we listened and we included it in our next release. We're gonna start with the Java first, then it will be followed by the .NET, then the Node.js. Java, because of course many of our enterprise applications are built by Java, so we gave it like the highest priority. Then moving to the .NET will be following according to the roadmap. Splunk real user monitoring for mobile, which is really important because some of our customers have started were using the Splunk Mint, which was the how Splunk was capturing data from mobile. So now it became end of life, and customers are going to start to move to Splunk real user monitoring for mobile. So not only for websites or web clients, it is as well as for mobile devices. It supports iOS and Android, and the most important thing that is built based on open telemetry standards, which is really important. So there is no lock-in, and they can work seamlessly with the back-end team. So back-end and front-end development team can work together to provide the end-to-end tracing and to make sure there are no silos. So the front-end people or front-end development team can see and trace the problems, whether it's from a screen or from an activity by the customer, network issue, a user experience issue. So it's really important because it gives insights, good insights, and again, it correlates with the back-end traces, so you can have end-to-end visibility across your application, which is really, really important. So yeah, Splunk CRUM is the new thing here, and I really encourage anyone who has been using Splunk Mint to start looking into it and consider it for monitoring, of course. Okay, finally, the Splunk app for content packs, which we have a new content pack for Microsoft 365. So the idea of content packs is, as been explained in the previous session, is for the ITSI or for the ITE essentials. I mean ITE work, which is the replacement for the Splunk app for infrastructure. So basically, these content packs are pre-built dashboards and KPIs that you need to enable in your ITSI environment to start having out-of-the-box dashboards or out-of-the-box panels and KPIs related to the service that you are trying to monitor. So our new announcement was for the Microsoft 365 and as well as the synthetic monitoring, because we have already a synthetic monitoring app that's already part of our observability suite, in addition to the third-party APM content pack. So if you have your existing APM like Dynamics or Dynatrace, New Relic, APM, and you want to get this data into ITSI and have like a consolidated view for the performance of application and correlate it with the infrastructure KPIs and other application metrics. So we have you covered here where you can start using it immediately. All right, I think that's all. Any questions? If you want to drop it in the chat, or you can unmute and ask me immediately. I'm happy to answer.
Thanks, Ahmed. Just quick one. Ahmed, the Splunk RAM and all, is it just like add-ons where we can just use it and start ingesting data to Splunk Enterprise, or is it a licensed product?
Splunk is a licensed product, so it's a separate product that you need to procure in order to use it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Just to add to Habib's question, APM also separate module, right? Habib?
Yeah, APM is a separate product. So observability, we have the Splunk APM, the RAM, the synthetic monitoring, of course. So basically, we focus on the application performance, and it's a separate license.
Also, Suresh, by the way, this is a cloud-based solution, so it's not available on-prem, specifically in your case, I think. Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Cool.
All right. Thank you all, and hope you enjoyed the session.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, man. Saurabh, over to you.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Ahmed. And thank you, everyone.